Well, welcome to our worship service from the Unitarian Society of Northampton in Florence. I'm Cathie Lilly, and I'm your Zoom host today. I want to express my thanks to David Nelson, who is also assisting with Zoom today. Welcome to our worship service from the Unitarian Society of Northampton in Florence. Okay. We strive to be a congregation that welcomes people of all ages, races, religious beliefs, backgrounds, sexual orientations, gender identities, and abilities. We belong to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Association of Congregations, and we are guided and inspired by its values and principles. Those values and principles move us to remember that we in Northampton inhabit unceded land of the Pecumtuck and Nipmuc peoples. Our values and principles remind us to acknowledge our responsibility to face all the painful legacies of dispossession and systematic racism that are part of our collective history, even as we affirm and celebrate the legacies that inspire us. We are here to support and celebrate one another and to renew ourselves with hope and gratitude and new resolve. If you are new or returning after a time away, welcome. We're very glad you're here. Please feel free to fill out a welcome card. Doing that allows us to put you on our email contact list, and there is a link to the card in the chat. Thank you, David. I also want to make certain I give special thanks today to Rich West for the sermon contents and much of the writing for today's service. We ask that you remain muted throughout the service and turn off your videos except during the greeting in order to help the technology work as smoothly as possible. We hope you'll stay for social hour afterwards. It's a great way to engage in meaningful conversations with people you might not otherwise have met. I want you to be aware that the prelude today has been borrowed from another UU congregation, so many of the announcements embedded there do not pertain to our congregation. And now we'll begin our service.
The opening words are from Reverend Alice Blair Wesley from her 2000 Minnesota lecture. In truth, the simple, transparent, potent idea of a free church has had to be, time and time and time again, reconceived, reconstructed in the human imagination from memories of the tradition so obscured or twisted or bent out of shape over time as to be sometimes almost gone from the world. Please join us in our chalice lighting. We light this chalice as a beacon of hope, a sign of our quest for truth and meaning. We light this chalice as a beacon of love in celebration of the life we share together.
And now it's time for us to greet one another. You're invited to turn on your videos, wave and say hello in the chat. If you're new or newish and would like to, please say hello and tell us where you're from. Okay, I think it's time for us to continue on with the service. And next is a hymn with a video of Gather the Spirit.
Our separate fires will kindle one flame. This is the organizing statement of the Northampton Congregational Society. The statement is from February 22nd, 1825. We disciples of Jesus Christ, having a firm belief in his religion, do hereby engage to walk together as a Christian church in the faith and order of the gospel. In necessarius unitas, necessarius liberalitas, in animas caritas, excuse my Latin pronunciations, in English, in necessary things, unity, in all things, love.
Kim, my script has you continuing on with the sermon.
Okay, my order meeting has something else here now. So Cathie, I defer to Cathie. What should be next?
Your first part of the sermon.
Yeah, do the first part of the sermon.
Okay, all right then. And again, our thanks to Rich West for the information and for compiling our statements this morning. Northampton, 200 years ago, was a village of about 3,000 persons, nearly all of them descendants of Yankee stock, most of them born and raised here and destined to die here. Communication with the world at large was scant. The people here depended on the Daily Hampshire Gazette for most of their news, save the occasional loquacious traveler or letter from a wayward relative. If you wished to visit Boston, it meant spending 2 days in an uncomfortable stagecoach or an uncovered sleigh. The first railroad line built in America was still 10 years in the future, and it would be another 10 after that before the Iron Horse reached Northampton. Even sending a letter to family or friends was the province of the well-to-do. A postage stamp cost 25 cents, which is the equivalent of more than $5 today. Of course, most people in town had no one to write to because everyone they knew lived right here. It was a small world. The Congregational Meeting House, the predecessor of today's First Churches, was the only church in town. It had 1,500 members and was said to be the largest congregation in New England. Everyone supported the church through the taxes they paid to the state. This practice did not end until 1833. If you didn't attend the church, you could not vote, and perhaps more importantly, you were disdained by your fellow townsfolk. The minister of the church was the most influential man in town. 75 years earlier, in Jonathan Edwards' day, the minister had all power over the religious, social, cultural, and implicitly the political life of the town. That had relaxed somewhat with the emergence of a Northampton professional class, but the minister remained out of strong feelings of fealty and reverence at the center of things. The Reverend Solomon Williams had presided over the Congregational Church since 1778, nearly 50 years, and as long as most Northamptonites could remember. He was an Orthodox Calvinist, preaching the doctrine of an angry God who had already determined who would reside with him in heaven and who would writhe in hell for eternity. Some parishioners chafed under his fire and brimstone sermons, especially after having heard the preachings in Boston of the charismatic liberal Congregationalist William Ellery Channing. Channing's message of a loving God and a dignified humankind had swept through Boston like an unquenchable fire, and by 1820, 10 of Boston's 11 Congregationalist churches had placed Channing disciples in their pulpits. Joseph Lyman, lay leader in the church, and his second wife, Anne Jean Lyman, resided literally and figuratively near the heart of the community, in a grateful two-story house that stood about where Starbucks is today, downtown on Main Street. The Reverend Williams had taken an interest in him while he was still a young boy, tutoring him and then sending him off to Yale at the age of 11 for a college education that the Reverend paid for. Lyman returned to Northampton to study the law, and by 1825, at the age of 58, he had become the dean of the Northampton Bar. Through inheritance and his own successful law practice, he had become one of the town's wealthiest citizens. His wife, Anne Jean, 22 years his junior, had been born and raised in Milton, the daughter of the town's liberal minister, Edward Robbins, and the proud direct descendant of the religious dissenter Anne Hutchinson. Many years later, a friend wrote of Anne Jean, "Anne's active intellect, her joyful disposition, her cheerful faith made her a radiating point of light and warmth. Frank and sincere, she said just what she thought, did just what she believed right, was wholly unconventional, and yet all saw that she was anchored by conscience to primal truths and was in no danger of drifting into any dangerous extreme. She was conservative by education and habit, but progressive by the independent activity of her mind." James Freeman Clark. She was also bright, lively, and cultivated, and within a short time of her arrival in Northampton in 1811, the Lyman home became the social center of town. The Lyman's happy circle was expanded in 1813, when Joseph's 28-year-old colleague in the Northampton Bar, Samuel Howe, married Anne's younger sister, Sally Robbins, making the two barristers brothers-in-law. For the first 10 years of the Howe's marriage, they lived in Worthington. In 1823, Judge Howe moved his family to Northampton to establish a law school. He conducted the school in his newly built home on Round Hill, what is now Smith College's Capon Hall. Sally Howe was her sister's intellectual equal, similarly committed to a liberal religious outlook. Her progressive religious views ended up converting her conservative husband. When he admitted his conversion, he admitted to his wife, "You do not know how much your conduct has influenced me." Sally reflected later that our religious sympathy was a new bond between us. Despite their alienation from the Calvinist faiths, the Lymans in the house had too much respect for the Reverend Williams to challenge his authority in the pulpit. However, by 1824, the aging Reverend Williams could no longer fully perform his ministerial duties, so the congregation initiated a search for his successor. The liberal Congregationalists in town, led by the Lymans in the house, saw this as a rare opportunity. When the Reverend Mark Tucker of Stillwater, New York, came in January of 1824 to preach at the church as a candidate, Judge Howe told him that if he agreed to an exchange of pulpits with more liberal colleagues 6 times a year, the liberals in town would support his candidacy. Tucker gave Howe and Lyman his assurances that he would gladly yield the pulpit once every 2 months to more liberal ministers in the valley. Within weeks of Tucker's call, however, trouble began. When the liberal Reverend William Peabody of Springfield offered to exchange pulpits with Tucker at his earliest convenience, Tucker replied in part, "I was not in the habit of making exchanges in the place where I came from, and I'm reluctant to preach before strangers, and besides, I have no horse and chaise." This rejection of what appeared to have been a clear agreement infuriated Lyman Howe and Judge Samuel Hinckley, another liberal leader. By December, the liberal element was, as they said, tuckered out. They began holding alternative services in the new town hall, the first one on December 5th, led by the spurned Reverend Peabody. Later in the month, at Lyman's invitation, 24-year-old Edward Brooks Hall, fresh out of Harvard Divinity School, arrived on the scene to minister to the small liberal flock. The establishment of a new church, one that stood for freedom of religious thought, was now merely a matter of time. On Sunday, February 20th, 1825, the three judges Lyman, Howe, and Hinckley went before the Congregational Society to ask that they divide church funds in an equitable manner so that the liberals could found their own society. When the proposal was resoundingly rejected, they walked out and never returned. 2 days later, the Unitarian Society, at the time called the Second Congregationalist Church of Northampton, was born. Sally Howe related the events to a Boston friend. Yesterday, we organized our society. About 50 persons associated themselves. Of these persons, not more than 6 or 7 can be said to be in easy circumstances. The others are persons who supply the wants of every day by the toil of every day. It will be obvious that the principal burden of expense must rest on the 6 or 7 first mentioned, but they are prepared for the world, and all, even the poorest, have manifested the disposition to do what they can. The impact of the split cannot be exaggerated. For the first time in its 170-year history, Northampton had 2 ministers in town and 2 congregations engaged in a competition of ideas. The Society's founding families suffered economic and social ostracism that lasted in some form for decades. One writer, remembering Northampton in the 1840s, said that the Unitarians in town were not considered a thoroughly Christian people and stood no chance of holding a town office. Lyman donated part of his gardening land to the Society, land originally owned by the patriot John Hancock. The band of liberals celebrated the permanence of their descent on May 25th, when they laid the cornerstone of the new building, curiously enough, in a Masonic ceremony. The principal speaker that day was the new Society's secretary, Charles Forbes, who would later give Northampton its glorious library. By sheer coincidence, on that same day in Boston, the American Unitarian Association, which we will hear more of later, was established. Though the weather hampered construction, the new structure was completed in time for a December 7th dedication ceremony, officiated by the Reverend Henry Ware, Jr. Society members referred lovingly to their building as our little Grecian temple. The Reverend Hall accepted the Society's call and was ordained August 16, 1826, almost a year later than was originally planned in deference to Hall's fragile health. It was a grand gathering. From outside the Northampton circle came Cummington native William Cullen Bryant, representing the New York Church, Greenfield Divinity student George Ripley, later the founder of Brook Farm, and a host of important Unitarian leaders. Under the Reverend Hall's leadership, the Society's membership rolls quickly swelled. Once the Unitarian Society had shown the way, the floodgates of religious dissent in Northampton broke open. Within 8 years of its founding, the Baptists, Methodists, Episcopalians, the ultra-Orthodox Calvinists had all left the first church to found their own. From 1805 to 1835, 125 Congregationalist churches in Massachusetts became Unitarian churches. Most had drifted towards liberalism, often following their ministers. The leaders of the Unitarian Church in Boston believed in incrementalism. They were sure no good would come from leading a frontal assault on Calvinism. Instead, they placed their trust in the wisdom of the people and believed that sooner or later they would respond to the Unitarian word. In 1825, some younger Unitarian ministers, frustrated by this passive approach, established the American Unitarian Association, The AUA was not an attempt to impose a hierarchy on the fledgling religious movement, only to give it a focus by providing support to new churches and publishing tracts to get the word out. The AUA viewed the tiny Northampton Society as an outpost from which the Unitarian seed might be planted throughout the hard conservative soils of Western Massachusetts. In 1827, Hall proposed going on a speaking tour of the region to promote the Unitarian faith. The AUA enthusiastically accepted his proposal and sought out a divinity student to take Hall's place in Northampton so that he could travel through Western Massachusetts. The divinity student who agreed to come to Northampton was Ralph Waldo Emerson. On August 31st, 1827, Waldo wrote to his brother William, "I am going to preach in Northampton in the service of the Unitarian Association for Mr. Hall a few weeks while he goes into the adjoining towns to missionize. His church is a small one, and I shall be able to preach all day, I suppose, without inconvenience." He stayed in the valley nearly 2 months, preaching in the Northampton church for 4 Sundays and 2 Sundays each in Greenfield and in Deerfield. For each Sunday's work, he was paid $10. Like most Unitarian visitors, he lived with the Lymans, whom he commented have a monopoly of the hospitality of the town. Anne Jean immediately recognized Emerson as special. She wrote to her sister, "Oh, Sally, I thought to entertain a pious indigent, but lo, an angel unawares." Later, when Emerson became a controversial figure, Anne Jean was among his chief defenders. Anne Jean's daughter recalled, "I saw her ready to shed tears when she could not see any appreciation of Emerson's thoughts in her listener. To one, I heard her say, 'Well, you call that transcendental, and that's all you have to say about it. I call it the profoundest common sense.'" Hall's sojourn into the Berkshires was encouraging, he reported, but the number of dissenters was too small for the establishment of self-sustaining societies. Hall's mission apparently was premature. This disappointment was conjoined with tragedy soon after Hall's return and Emerson's departure. Judge Howe had apparently suffered from migraine headaches most of his adult life, and in 1827 also from shortness of breath. While he was traveling on business in the eastern part of the state, he suffered a hemorrhage and died. He was 43. The loss of this church pillar stunned the young society, none more so, of course, than his wife Sally and the Lymans. Of their grief, the Lyman's daughter remembered, "I recall the sad expression of their bowed heads every Sunday in church for many months, and the almost constant weeping of my mother whenever an interval from her active duties left her time to weep." Judge Howe's death elicited sympathy from throughout the Unitarian community. Letters of condolence filled the postal baskets at the Howe and Lyman residences. Emerson wrote to Anne Jean, "To me, his death was a most unexpected disappointment. I had rejoiced in the good fortune in making his acquaintance and looked forward with earnest to its continuance. His acquaintance was a privilege which no young man could enjoy without being excited to an ambition of deserving his friendship. There was something in his character which seemed to make excessive sorrow unseasonable and unjust to his memory, and all who have heard of his death have derived from it new force to virtue and new confidence to faith." The society survived this first test, but many more were to come. Through it all, the Unitarian Society persevered. That little band of 43 religious liberals who championed free thought and free speech in 1825 would surely be proud to know that 2 centuries later, we continue their important work today.
Now it's time for our offering. Links directing you on how to donate online will be pasted into the chat while you enjoy the video of the hymn Love will guide us.
Love will guide us. Peace has tried us. Hope inside us will lead the way on the road from greed to giving. Love will guide us through the dark night. If you cannot sing like angels, if you cannot speak before thousands, you can give from deep within you. You can change the world with your love. You are like no other being. What you can give, no other can give. To the future of our precious children, to the future of the world where we live. Love will guide us. Peace has tried us. Hope inside us will lead the way on the road from greed to giving. Love will guide us through the dark night. Hear the song of peace within you. Heed the song of peace in your heart. Spring's new beginning will lead to the harvest. Love will guide us on our way, on our way. Love will guide us. Peace has tried us. Hope inside us will lead the way on the road from greed to giving. Love will guide us through the dark night.
Good morning. I'm going to begin by reading the organizing statement of the Free Congregational Society of Florence, written in 1863. Respecting in each other and in all the right of intellect and conscience to be free, and holding it to be the duty of everyone to keep his mind and heart at all times open to receive the truth and follow its guidance, we set up no theological condition of membership and neither demand nor expect uniformity of doctrinal belief, asking only unity of purpose to seek and accept the right and true, and an honest aim and effort to make these the rule of life. And recognizing the brotherhood of the human race and the equality of human rights, We make no distinction as to the conditions and rights of membership to the society on account of sex or color or nationality. Part 2, Florence. 160 years ago, the notion of inherent human dignity was encountered mainly in the rarefied world of philosophy and the upper reaches of political discourse. Those who put this idea into daily practice were on the far fringes of an intolerant and bigoted culture. Among the most important of those practitioners were the founders of the Free Congregational Society of Florence. It is hard to believe that in 1863, a group of mostly middle class, mostly white American men and women would issue the statement we open with, is worth repeating. Respecting in each other and in all the right of intellect and conscience to be free, and holding it to be the duty of everyone to keep in mind and heart at all times open to receive the truth and follow its guidance, we set up no theological condition of membership and neither demand nor expect uniformity of doctrinal belief, asking only unity of purpose to seek and accept the right and true, and an honest aim and effort to make these the rules of life. And recognizing the brotherhood of the human race and the equality of human rights, we make no distinction as to the conditions and rights of membership in this society on account of sex or color or nationality. Perhaps with repeated hearings, we have become dulled to the power of these words. Perhaps we are not shocked by this declaration's radicalness today, precisely because they are now widely accepted precepts of responsible living. But we owe these brave people the effort of imagining what a risk they took in 1863 to affirm this prophetic statement. Much like the Declaration of Independence has acted as a signpost for the culture in its efforts to realize a fully democratic society, the Florence Statement of 1863 articulated a vision of a tolerant society that we have been striving to achieve ever since. What led to this radical act? While the society formally organized in 1863, its roots stretched back to 1842, with the founding of the Northampton Association of Education and Industry. Many community members had been forced out of their ancestral churches because of their abolitionist views and were embittered toward organized religion. They came to the Northampton community committed to a non-sectarian form of spiritual life. This meant no church, no minister, no creed. Instead, they gathered on Sunday afternoons for moral and religious discussions, at which all were invited to speak. When the community disbanded in 1846, dozens of its members remained and incidentally founded the town of Florence in 1852. They had abandoned their hopes of transforming society by example, but they continued to cherish the idea of a creedless spiritual life. So they continued their informal Sunday afternoon meetings. In April of 1858, the worship group took an important step toward permanence when it asked Charles Burley, Connecticut abolitionist and editor, to become its resident speaker. In that role, Burley, whose Christ-like portrait hangs above the door to the church offices in our parlor, led about half of the Sunday discussions throughout the year. In 1863, hard on the heels of the founding of the First Congregationalist Church of Florence, the group decided to further formalize their commitment to one another and incorporate as the Free Congregational Society of Florence. While the society began with 35 men and women, white and black, 3 men were central to its existence: Samuel Hill, Alfred Lilly, and Charles Burley. Sam Hill had been one of the organizers of the 1840s utopian community. When the community collapsed, He assumed its assets and its debts. He was forced to work for many years to retire that debt, but he emerged from the process a rich man with a controlling interest in the Nonotuck Silk Manufacturing Company. While he was a capitalist, he had vision and heart. He encouraged the homesteading of Florence on old community property by loaning money to settlers on favorable terms. He was the one who lent Sojourner Truth the money to build a home on Park Street. He was a staunch advocate of public education, establishing one of the first free public kindergartens in America, the Hill Institute, paying for the construction of Florence schools and then donating them to the town, and serving for many years on the Florence school board. He began life as a Quaker, became a Baptist, and then once in Florence, found spiritual peace with the creedless faith of the Northampton community and the Free Congregational Society. He was the society's most generous benefactor, paying for more than half of the construction costs on Cosmian Hall and making additional gifts in the tens of thousands of dollars over the years. Alfred Lilly came to Florence in 1853 as one of Hill's employees in the Nonotuck Silk Company. After gaining Hill's confidence, he rose quickly in the ranks and eventually became a part owner. With his newfound wealth, he helped establish the Florence Savings Bank. Understanding the power of money, even in small amounts, he promoted the policy that the bank was there to serve the community. A believer in the power of education like Hill, he paid the entire cost for the construction and endowment of the Lilly Library. As for the Free Congregational Society, he was one of its most radical founders and second only to Hill as a benefactor. So concerned was he that the society never take on the trappings of organized religion that he stipulated that he would withdraw his annual support of the society if the institution ever called itself a church. Charles Burley, the society's first and most influential resident speaker, has come down to us as something of a saint. One of the founding members of the Free Congregational Society wrote of him, "Probably few professing Christians have imitated more nearly than he did the life of Jesus. He was a fighting abolitionist and risked his life on several occasions defending others in the cause against the anger of the mob. He was judged by many to have been the ablest public speaker to ever live in Northampton, silencing the opposition with his persuasive logic and eloquence. He was singularly important in shaping the character of the Free Congregational Society's meetings. He stressed complete democracy and encouraged independent thought. His discourses touched on all phases of questions pertaining to human welfare, social reform, and the extension of knowledge. In the spirit of democracy, he always followed up his remarks with a freewheeling question and answer session. Ed Lawton, in his History of the Congregation, written 50 years ago, suggests that this may have been the only congregation in the country at the time that engaged in such an unorthodox practice. Burley encouraged the congregation to act on its convictions, not just talk about them. In 1869, with the passage of the 16th Amendment giving Black men the vote, the Free Congregational Society petitioned Congress to extend the right to women as well. The following year, when the congregation had grown to 170 members, it hired Elizabeth Powell to serve with Burley. She was the first female to serve a Northampton congregation and may have been the first in the state. She returned in 1884 as sole resident speaker, only to leave a few years later to become a dean at Swarthmore College. In addition to Burley and Powell, the Society's lectern was graced by a pantheon of 19th century liberals, among them Frederick Douglass, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Julia Ward Howe, William Lloyd Garrison, Sojourner Truth, and many other brave men and women less well known today. It is hardly necessary to say that the Free Congregationalists were not aligned with any organized religion. They were not in step with the Unitarian Church of 150 years ago and the Unitarian Church would not have them. When the society sent Burley and A. Bronson Alcott, Louisa May's radical dad, to represent it at the first National Convention of Unitarians in 1865, Burley came back fighting mad. In a report to the society, he charged that he and Alcott had been subjected to, quote, dishonorable, arrogant, and unchristian conduct by certain members. He said it proved, quote, how difficult it is for a man to be a priest and at the same time to have a tolerant, enlarged, and magnanimous soul. He believed that the spirit of the convention confirmed the wisdom and necessity of the free Congregational society, which combined the advantages of association without ecclesiastical trammels and a platform for the utterance of human thought without fetters. At first, the society met in the Florence schoolhouse, a one-story building located where the community center now stands on Pine Street. In 1864, Hill erected its two-story building designated Florence Hall for the society, which also served the town as a school, a meeting hall, and a library. But the society under Burley flourished and quickly outgrew these modest quarters. In 1873, the society built a grand meeting hall in the center of Florence, where the Civic Center now stands, and had a 5-story tower and sat 700 people. The new hall, dubbed Cosmian Hall by the society's resident speaker at the time, became one of the most recognizable symbols of the free religious movement in America. Though Cosmian Hall loomed over the center of downtown Florence, many village residents regarded the society with suspicion. They called it various names, including the Devil's Church, a nest of perdition, a hall of darkness, and the home of cranks. Society members were routinely ostracized by neighbors. One Florence resident, who later joined the society, remembered as a child on her way to and from school running past Cosmian Hall as quickly as she could, fully expecting the devil himself to emerge from within. The congregation's fiery spirit began to flicker as one after another of the founders died. Burley in 1878, Hill in 1882, and Lilly in 1890. Because Hill and Lilly were the society's most generous supporters, their deaths brought financial hardship on the congregation. The money problems eased somewhat when the society joined the American Unitarian Association in 1897 and received grant money from Boston. But the size of the congregation continued to shrink. By 1920, the congregation could no longer properly maintain Cosmian Hall. It sold the building to the Florence Amusement Association, which operated it as a public hall before tearing it down in 1947. The congregation built a smaller church across the street, which still stands and has been the home of the Seventh-day Adventists for 70 years. In 1944, when the Florence Society merged with the Northampton Church, both congregations had less than 36 members. Looking back, it appears that the elaborate 2-day dedication ceremony of Cosmian Hall in 1874 was the apex of the society's fame and vigor. The event received coverage around the world. Hundreds of radicals traveled from across the country to be there. One who could not attend, the great abolitionist Theodore Weld, sent greetings on the occasion, in which he said, quote, every year of the last 10, I have drunk the free breath of the Florence Free Platform and thanked God for that draft. Blessings on those who opened the font and have now so amply enlarged it. May its invigorating tonic flow everywhere and forever, end quote. We are the keepers of that font today. We are the direct descendants of those original minds and courageous souls. And we have the power to keep that invigorating tonic flowing everywhere and forever. Thank you.
Wake now, my senses. senses and hear the earth call. Feel the deep power of being in all. Keep with the web of creation your love, giving, receiving, as love shows us how. Wake now, my reason, reach out to the new. Join with each pilgrim who quests for the true. Honor the beauty and wisdom of time. Suffer thy limit and praise the sublime. Wake now, compassion, give heed to the cry. Voices of suffering fill the wide sky. Take as your neighbor both stranger and friend, praying and striving their hardship to end.
Our founding families were radicals in their beliefs and actions. Each group made impactful changes in structure based on what was happening in the wider world at the time. This congregation has a strong history of social justice and openness to new ideas. Our early history is just the beginning of our story. We seek to become more a society that not only stands, but acts on our principles and purposes and finds common purpose as one. This year, we will be spending time sharing in services and listening circles, learning more about where we are and who we want to be, so that we can stand firm with our values and take our faith in a forward direction that is inclusive and ready for the 21st century. Thank you for your participation in our service today.
We hope that you will enjoy the postlude Love by Duke Ellington and that you'll stay for social hour. When the music finishes, you'll be invited into smaller groups to share your name, your pronouns, if you'd like to, and to talk about what's on your mind and your heart.